Hello, and welcome to the final project layout for the Outside the Box project. Today, we are going to be talking about how to begin the final project. Now, you received the brainstorm packet at the beginning of this unit, and in this packet, you have access to 2 full pages of patterns that I provide. You also have I think it's like 8 pages of people to choose from, so lots and lots of people to be able to pick out of. Now, I think it's like 96 options, so many possibilities here. Now, you also have the option of printing your own of the portrait or the pattern, so you can print those out and bring them if you would like to. Now, when you do that, you'll need to have 2 copies of each, the person and the pattern. So we are going to begin by having just both of your pictures and both of your patterns. Now, on the back of one of these, you are going to start with a graphite stick by just finding the border, like as far out as the person actually goes. And you're just going to go through and fill this background to be very filled. You don't want to put yourself at a disadvantage by not filling it all the way in, so that if you were transferring and if you skipped like a section, like if I just forgot to fill this part in or did it very lightly, and then I traced something in that area, it would not show up very well. So we want to make sure we fill in everything to be nice and medium toned. And when you're finished filling in, you are going to cut around the outside edge. Now, on my example, I cut a little bit close. I wanted to show you what it will look like in the end, but I would say to leave like a 1/4 inch of a border all the way around as you cut this out. So this would be the line that you would cut on rather than up against the actual image. Now, this is what it looks like. I've got my person and he is on my gray toned paper, which is what we're using for the final draft. I would like to talk to you about how to place the person and the patterns because there's so many possibilities. Before we do though, I would like to show you some good examples of students that have created these projects in the past. I'd first like to show you just a couple of examples of just really high quality shading on the person with the charcoal, and also high quality coloring and bringing that part of the project forward. Here's another great, beautiful example of a high quality charcoal portrait and high quality coloring in the background with that part of the pattern coming forward. And then just another good example of the charcoal portrait and adding in that color. Now let's take a look at some other options of things you might consider as you are working on coming up with your layout. First, I wanted to show you that you have the ability to break down the sections and leave a little sliver out in the pattern that you trace. So if you were tracing this pattern, you just would not trace anything within these lines. And you can give yourself those right at the beginning and just not add any of the details within that space. I thought this one turned out to be really cool. Just those little slices makes a really big difference in the end result. Here is another that breaks down the pattern into 2 separate sections. So just adding that subtle little break there, I think makes a really big difference in the overall end result. And here is another student that did that same idea by breaking down the space between the pattern. But I love how this student put them on the outside. So it's got a little bit of like a border of color coming in from the diagonals and connecting that corner. That's a really beautiful composition. One other option you have to consider is the ability to remove part of the background. So here is a good example of a student doing this. He took a pattern with fish, and on the areas where it was like surrounding his face, he overlapped the image and took out the background. So you can take out the background color and have just the objects that are overlapping and intertwining with your portrait. Another example is this one, and these palm trees do have a background. The student just chose to not color it and to leave it gray and brought those palms back into the foreground as well so that they are overlapping. And here is the last example I'd like to show you before practicing our layout. And this is another beautiful example removing the color in the background of your pattern. So you can choose to leave that part out, and that allows for you to overlap in a really beautiful way. So you can see that these details are then starting to go over the top of the person. So that's a really beautiful option. Now let's talk a little bit about our composition. Here is my final paper, and I would like to just put some black paper behind it so that you can really see what the composition looks like, because I'm working on top of a gray surface, which makes it hard to see the gray paper that I am working on top of. But here is a little bit of a black border so that you can really see what I am talking about. Now, first I want to point out that this portrait has a corner. And this is something I have to address at the beginning. So my biggest recommendation is to just pop that corner right into the corner so that you don't have to make up the rest of the details. As if I were to draw him a little higher, I would have to decide where the shoulder transitions are, how the light hits on his back. There's just a lot of information I don't have. So I like to put the corner into the corner so I don't have to come up with anything new. There is also the option to use part of your patterns. So I've cut my pattern into a couple different pieces here. So here are some scraps of my pattern that I'm just gonna kind of play around with. Now, first of all, I really love a good diagonal composition. And when we have a corner portrait, that sets us up beautifully to create that. Now, a corner diagonal composition just kind of like ties a line between opposing or opposite corners. Now we've already kind of got that line kind of leading us out that direction, so I feel like that would be a positive way to create this portrait. However, the first consideration is this corner. Now we could give it like a border to make it like even on both sides. So if I tucked this in like right here and came in and left my portrait or my pattern border in like that same way, and maybe I like came in and left that same border, that's kind of cool. So it doesn't have to touch the corner or run into it, but I would like for you guys to try to figure out a way to like make this nice and even if that's a choice you make. Now you could also come in and cover up that corner. So if I wanted to like have him a little bit over here, and then maybe I would bring in my foreground to cover up that corner, and here's a little lightning bolt that I could just draw on top, then that could cover the corner as well. Now, when we're thinking in a diagonal composition, I quite often like to put my pattern in that same line. So if I were thinking diagonal, I might just like start by putting this in the other corner. Now, one thing I don't love about this layout is it leaves this corner hanging out. And I feel like that's an awkward amount of space. So something that you could do to make that composition better is to just scooch that over just a smidge and see how now that tucks behind his chin and it's just a little bit more successful. And then I could come in with some of my foreground pieces and just have that kind of overlapping here. Now, that's just one option, and I can keep playing around. I think this is my favorite so far, but I could keep playing around with maybe like having a break in this space. So maybe I would have like two skinny sections, and these kind of line up together. So maybe I would like try to have these kind of laying out, and maybe I wouldn't even use the background color. So maybe I would just draw these lightning bolts directly on top of the gray. Now I could kind of like play around with having these in the background, having like that little split. That's kind of cool. So maybe I would have that little split, and maybe I would bring in like another little pop of like a lightning bolt down here. So that could work. I want you to also consider ways that you can like consider the background shape and whether it matches the shape of the person's face. So you do not have to work in a rectangle. So with my person, it's more of like a diagonal linear line. So because this is kind of like straight up and down, maybe I would cut it so that it's more at like the shape is more at an angle to kind of create that repetition. I also have more of like a taller rectangle shape compared to other faces that might work better with like a square or a circle, something that's squatter, something that fits that shape a little bit better. So quite often a good composition creates repetition with the shape of the person's face and trying to play around with that. Now, once you've decided where your pieces are going to go, we will come in with masking tape And we are just going to first make sure that the back has all of the graphite stick filled in so that it's completely solid. This is not filled in, of course, just a little, but it should be all the way filled in. And I am just going to take this and tape it so that it is hanging on one edge of my pattern. So I'm gonna just fold this and look at the back edge to make sure that this corner is in the correct spot, and then I'll just tape that down, and I do not remove him until the very end of this unit. Now, I also had a couple other pieces that I was going to attach. One of them is going to be overlapping on this side. So what I can do for this, because that's going to create some problems, I cannot attach it to the same spot as this, because then when I transfer, I will be transferring onto my guy instead of onto the background, which is where I need it to see what I'm doing. So what I can do instead is I can switch the side of the place where I'm taping it. So I might just kind of peel this guy back, and I'm gonna put this right along that edge, and I'm just gonna tape it there. Fold that over, and now I can move this guy down and trace this on top. So I've got kind of like these folding pieces that I can then overlap. Now, I think I liked the layout with this kind of tucked into his neck space right here. So I think I'll probably tape that here. And then the next step is to go through and complete the transfer the same way that we did for our practice face. So you're gonna go through and outline not only the facial features, but also where the values change in all of these locations. So when we are transferring for the pattern, we might go through and just give ourselves an outline of where it touches our person so that you don't accidentally trace those parts of the pattern, because we want to avoid, unless it's intentionally overlapping, like our foreground coming in front, we want to make sure we don't have like random pattern going into our face. So then I would only trace and transfer on the areas outside of this space, so I can see right where those spaces go. Now, once I have finished my transfer, the next step, and you can see all of the final instructions are listed in your lesson guide. So you are welcome to grab your lesson guide. And here is the final instruction page. You are selecting your reference photo and doing your transfer like we just talked about. The next steps are working on all of the white charcoal for your entire face. And you're gonna come in and just like we did for our practice, you are going to do all of the white first for the face and the eyes and all of those things, and then you're gonna come in for the black charcoal layer. Now remember that some areas like the hair and the lips add white at the very end, but for the most part, like all of the highlights that we're coming in to lighten with our white charcoal pencil should be done before we come in for black. The next step is working with your blending stump layer on the face and getting it to be nice and smooth, doing all of your perfecting. And then the last step is the hair. And the hair comes last because it has the most charcoal in it and it has a higher smudge factor. So if you do your hair first and it's really dark, you are going to have the problem of like trying not to smudge it the entire time you're working. Now, before you can start coloring, you must check in with me. And this is a mandatory step to make sure your accuracy is to the level I'm expecting it to be. But after that, you are welcome to continue into the colored pencil portion for your pattern. Now, one thing to remember as you're working through this, especially after you've made some good progress, is that if I had just drawn, say I had just drawn this ear and then I had to hop back over to work on something in the eye, I am going to just take a scrap piece of paper, set my hand down on top of the scrap paper, and I can move as much as I want, and I'm not smudging the work that I just did like how you saw I might if I didn't have this scrap piece of paper. So as you're working, especially moving into the colored pencil step, make sure that you utilize your scrap paper so that you're not damaging the drawing that you spent so long working on. Now, after you've added your colored pencil, you can go back through and just make sure that everything is to the highest level of accuracy that you can possibly reach. And then you'll come and check in with me at the end to see if there is anything else that we can do to make your project even better. But I am so excited to see what you come up with and to see how this class's projects turn out. It's one of my favorites, and I just can't wait to see what you guys choose to do. So good luck, and come and ask me if you have any questions at all. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy!